the only one that didn't find time to eat today. So there's Senator Chittenden and Karen Horn. Assuming Randy will be here. He's here, okay. So, the local option tax bill, XS60. We've had this walk through. Karen, do you wanna talk to us a little bit about this? And
Sure. For the record, my name's Karen Horn and I'm with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. We've supported extending authority for the voters to adopt local option taxes in their communities for a long, long time. And I went back and looked at my testimony from last year to your committee. The Senate has consistently supported municipalities being able to adopt local option taxes without going through the legislature for a charter change amendment. You've supported that in 2008, 2012, 2013, in 2020, and in 2022. Maybe we'll get it all the way through this time. Right now, I just wanted to give you a little perspective on what's in place right now. Today, there are 19 towns with a local option sales tax. There are 23 towns with the local option rooms and meals tax. And some of those towns obviously overlap because they've adopted both sales and rooms and meals. And then the town of Elmore has just a rooms local option tax. In addition, the cities of Rutland and Burlington have general charter authority to adopt local option taxes. In Burlington, what you essentially have is a gross receipts tax, according, based on my most recent reading of their regulations. And in addition to that, Act 60 authorized what were then called the gold towns or the sending towns to adopt local option taxes without going through the legislature. And on a list that was put together by Sarah Teachout from the Joint Fiscal Office at the time, I believe it was in 2015, there were 76 towns that have that authority. So our primary argument at this point is that there's no sense in restricting those other towns that aren't part of the 76 or the 1923 towns that have adopted through the charter change. There's no sense in restricting them from being able to vote to approve a local option tax within their own borders. We've also seen, particularly during the pandemic, that sales and tax revenues have exceeded expectations in most cases. I guess not in the most recent monthly report to the Joint Fiscal Committee, but certainly before that. And the same with meals and rooms, although the margins of increase have been somewhat smaller there. But it's clear to us that the fact that a municipality adopts a local option tax does not in any way affect the revenues of the state. So, and that has been an argument that was raised in the past, particularly in the House Ways and Means Committee. So I just want to talk about that for a moment. So we do support S60. We hope you will support it as well. The one interesting innovation in S60 is that it would allow the commissioner of the Department of Taxes to inform towns about the revenues that are raised in their communities. And we think that that's pretty important, that towns would be able to, of course, the Department of Taxes always says if there are too few taxpayers in a category, they won't inform you because it's too easy to identify the individuals. But for instance, if municipalities could see the amount of sales tax that was generated from their community for online sales or for retail cannabis or for utilities, then that would be very helpful information. And I think it would sort of turn around the sometimes argument that in very small towns, there's no reason to adopt a local option tax. Well, every single town has people who get online sales delivered to their houses now. And so there would be an advantage financially to towns to adopt a local option tax. And then I'm, of course, talking backwards now, but the reason that we're interested in general is that when you have only the municipal property tax with which to fund all your services, it's just not sufficient at this point in time. There's just too many responsibilities on local governments. We can't do it all and ask municipal property taxpayers to shoulder that entire burden. So that was a little bit disjointed. I apologize, Madam Chair, but I'm happy to take questions.
Okay. Any questions? And I cannot see my people on Zoom. See, we're going to put you up. There you all are. Any questions? Okay. I will have the tax department in to talk about whether or not they have that information or how difficult it will be to break it out. But I think that would be helpful if they can get it easily. Also,
yeah, oh, sorry.
Yeah. The other thing, some of this money, doesn't it go into a fund for, no, it does. Senator Chitton.
So that was one question. Thank you, Chair, for raising it. And Karen, I'd love to know if you have thoughts or any expertise on this. I'm under the impression that but for accepting St. Albans and Burlington, 30% of the collected local options tax of the rest of the communities, the 19 that have it, the state keeps and then pays to payment in lieu of taxes for state-owned properties around the state. And that this could affect the revenues of the state, if anything, to the positive, because the 30% kept would actually add to our collective coffers for both overseeing the collection of and distribution of the options tax. Is that anything you're familiar with that you would validate? I know that we're gonna have the commissioner in, he can speak more.
I would say that go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, that is true. It's Rutland City and Burlington who have independent charter authority, and their taxes and their local options are not subject to the 30%. But every other municipality that has a local option tax, 30% of the revenues that they raise go to the pilot fund, which pays for state buildings in lieu of the state paying property taxes.
Right. But a lot of that was because we didn't allow towns to have a local option tax unless they got permission. And when we were only looking at towns with retail capacity, that got pretty limited because most of them have a gas station and general store. But everybody does online sales. So it might be, that might be the trade-off.
Yeah, the Wayfair decision would really change the picture with respect to local option sales tax, as it did for the state. actually, once you started receiving revenues from online sales.
Yes. Made a big difference. Okay, well, we will have the tax department in. And Karen, maybe you could check with your members and see, you know, since now every town could take advantage of doing a local option. We'll see if we can find out how much each town is getting.
Yeah, I think that
Probably are.
I think on the tax department website, I was on there a little bit earlier, and they will tell you in general how much of sales tax is in each community. What they don't do is break it out at all.
Okay.
So for instance, online sales, it would be nice if towns could see sort of what online sales tax revenue might be in their community. The one other thing I meant to mention, senators, is that Senator Mazza has introduced a bill, and I don't have the number right in front of me right now, but South Hero last year adopted a local option tax. They
Yeah.
weren't aware they had to actually have a charter change in order to do that. They don't have a charter yet. So Senator Mazza introduced a bill that would give South Hero the authority that they voted on last year to adopt a local option sales tax. And Legislative Council has made that a municipal charter because they said that needs to happen. But anyway, so that's out there as well.
Okay, I actually had a discussion with the chair of GovOps over in the cafeteria line today. And she was wanting to make sure we coordinated that. If we do this, it should make that bill moot, because then we might have to write something retroactive for them, but so she and I are just keeping tabs on where all of these bills are. But as you said, this bill in one form or another has passed the Senate on more than one occasion. But there's new people in the House, and maybe this time we'll make it.
New people in the Senate.
Yeah.
New people in the Senate, we might not make it. Okay, Senator Chittenden.
Karen, the second part of this bill, which you spoke about briefly, has to do with visibility into the revenue sources. And the example I use in South Burlington, if the U-Mall gets demolished, demoed, to be redone for a lot of new purposes, and we are going to go without that revenue, that local options tax revenue from that commercial center for 2 to 10 years, who knows what might happen. It would be useful for the city of South Burlington to be able to plan accordingly with the anticipated loss of revenue with that visibility. I know the unsolicited, the town manager for Williston sent us a letter in support of this. I'd be curious, this is relatively new language, the commissioner caught me. If you have from your members additional support for that transparency, it might be helpful to illuminate that part of this bill going forward.
Thank you. I will try to get those towns together. We've heard about this quite frequently over the years, so I need to go back and do some checking. But yeah, it's absolutely something that towns have asked for in the past.
Okay, we have the tax department on our list to come talk to us. And we'll see if we can find out what information they have. And, you know, it'll be the availability, I think, of the information. If they have it, we should be fine.
Yeah. One more item, Senator. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
This is great.
This
Keeps
is one of those
expanding.
days we're all eating lunch during committee, so.
Okay, so just this before the session started, I think the tax department had put together a map of where retail businesses were that were subject to local option taxes. And we've always had this issue in the past where on the borders, there were some businesses that paid local option because they thought they were part of Barry City, but they were in Barry Town, that kind of thing. And you might ask Rebecca Samaroff at the tax department specifically to give you a demonstration of that map, because it's really resolved that issue.
Can you email that information to Jill? So
Yeah.
tell her what we should ask for,
Okay.
and we won't have to hope that we all took notes quickly. Okay. All right, committee. We're marching through the bills before we get out of here. And, we're only 10 minutes ahead. I will have the tax department come in. And then talk about what we do about South Hero, because if this passes us, then maybe they just need to do that bill and send it to the House. Because if this bill doesn't pass the House, then South Hero is still kind of hanging out there. But any questions at this point from the committee? Any big concerns? Anything I need to get in? I'm having the sense, I'm working on the assumption that the committee is probably favorable to this bill.
I don't hate it.
Hmm?
I don't hate it.
You don't hate it. That's favorable.
Yeah.
We'll take that.
So.
I would want to know, I want to know more about it, and particularly forward-looking issues such as what the impact is going to be overall. That 1% is coming out of taxpayers' pockets. And I'd like to know what the effect of that will be. And that's kind of, I know a little bit of economic projection, but that's some of the things that I think we ought to be discussing, the impact on consumers and on markets generally, and on the individuals who are going to be affected by it. By taking the 1% out, for example, our town's going to reduce the amount of potential increase of property taxes, or is this 1% that's going to be spent for something else additive to what taxpayers are already paying right now? And we just need a little bit more information, and that will presumably come out of testimony.
Okay, Karen, if you can just get us some town people that would like, maybe South Burlington, one of those that could tell us what they do. The other argument that has been raised in the past from day one was that the sales tax was one of the state's revenue sources. It is now the primary non-property revenue source. And so if we let the towns cut into that, if the towns all have 1%, then if the state needs revenue or the ed fund needs revenue, we can't go up on the sales. You know, there's only a certain amount of elasticity in any tax. And that in doing this, we were giving up a state tax capacity. The argument back from Karen's people but the property tax was our sole ability to raise taxes, and you've already taken that. And that's why this trade-off has been being discussed for over 25 years. And it's still being discussed. So
we do think that the history of the local option tax has shown that a local option tax doesn't affect the state's revenue. Like your revenue in the past several years have been going up. To Senator Brock's question, there are at least 2 towns that have dedicated, there's more than 2, but 2 that come to mind offhand, that have dedicated the proceeds of the local option sales tax to a particular purpose. In Montgomery, it's going to help write down the cost of their wastewater treatment facility that they're hoping to build in the village. And in Colchester, the funding is dedicated to economic development and growth kinds of initiatives.
Okay, I got Senator Chittenden.
I definitely agree with Senator Brock's point. I'd love to hear the JFO talk about what this could do for the state's revenues. I just want to highlight one important thing that's different than a statewide additional percentage is that each community would have to choose to enact this tax on themselves. So if Jericho wanted to have a vote to say, let's all have every Jericho resident that buys anything here pay 1%, they would have to still have that choice. So that's a big difference in my mind to your concern, Senator Brock. That's important to keep in the conversation.
Agreed.
Okay. So we will continue this discussion. We have 10 days left, 11, I guess, if you count tomorrow. And we've got a few big ones out there like TIFs. At this point, I'm hoping to clear out the smaller bills next week and then spend that last week trying to work through that project-based TIF bill, because that's probably the most complicated, and we've never done the deep dive that economic development has, mostly because of timing and when it arrives. Those bills usually arrive the day before crossover or the day, yeah. So we will we'll take a look at all of those. Karen.
Yeah, just one, I apologize to Senator Chittenden, but there are 3 cities that have local option taxes outside of the statutory local option tax provisions. And it's Burlington, Rutland, and St. Albans City. So my bad.
I only knew about Burlington. Montpelier didn't write its charter correctly.
The mayor
No.
of St. Albans is married to my cousin, so I know he told me about this. So that's
Okay, this is Vermont. Okay, thank you. We will get this back. I've got a thing into JFO to look at any potential impact on the state's taxing capacity. It's not revenue, but it's our, the study, the childcare study. Several of their suggestions for raising money for childcare suggested raising the sales tax or extending it. If we're at 5, if the majority of towns go up 1, then our effective sales tax rate is 6. It's harder for the state to add another cent. So that's been the argument in the past. We'll see what JFO has to say, but in the end, we will make that decision. Okay.
What has it been raised, Madam Chair?
The 5 and 6, it's gone up and down. It got raised to 6 at one point, then dropped back to 5, then went back up, and I'm sure you remember what the trade-off was.
1991.
Oh, that was before my time, Senator.
Anyway, so what does a penny on sales tax raise?
actually, Chair.
Yes,
I just looked that up in the RAND report for a constituent inquiry, and I believe it estimated a 1% increase in the statewide sales tax would raise 89 million, is what I think I saw in the child care report.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Chittenden.
okay. So, all right. So committee, Karen, I guess you're leaving, everyone else is staying. I'm waiting for TJ Poor. And this is our start of our walkthrough of renewable energy standards. I don't know, is TJ zooming coming? He's zooming. Okay, so this is really energy regulation or renewable energy regulation 101. We're about 5 minutes ahead of time. So maybe we can take a short break while TJ zooms in. We are still live. Oh no, are we all muted? No.
I'll mute the room.
You mute the room? Okay.
I don't think we can hear them, but I guess you can still hear me, right, Senator Brock?
I can,
I guess we're still on YouTube, so.
you know. Yep.
I think I saw there's another storm coming in this afternoon. Is that what you saw?
Well, yeah, it doesn't look like it's particularly heavy. They're talking about an inch, maybe up to 3, between tonight and tomorrow, and then snow showers in the morning. But this current snow is not nearly what was predicted, but it was still pretty messy up here.
All my kids' school got canceled last night at 7:30, so it just made it easier.
Well, all the schools were canceled here yesterday, as of yesterday afternoon, in fact. So everybody, I think, was anticipating that foot of snow, and I don't have a foot of snow. I still got quite a bit of snow, but not a foot.
Yeah, we got about 7 inches here. So really. Are you in Swanton or are you in St. Albans?
I'm in the town of Swanton. My mailing address is St. Albans, but I live in Swanton. What was at one time called Swanton Center.
What's your commute in the morning? 50 minutes, an hour?
No, it's about an hour 5. Assuming everything goes all right.
You ever stay down there?
Pretty rarely. I stayed down, I think, one night so far this year.
Yeah, me
But
too.
that's it.
I don't like driving in icy roads. White knuckles, not for me.
Well, it could be a little bit messy in the morning, but again,
Wall that he was saying was going to be raised.
You can ask him. We're back live.
Senator from Chittenden, what's the mall that was being raised?
So the University Mall in South Burlington, it's 80 acres right by I-89. So when you pull off exit 14, it's the biggest mall in the state. It was purchased by a new owner probably 6 years ago, and they are looking at some pretty dramatic changes to the footprint of the law, all for the better. They want to use it for affordable housing, multi-layered housing, high-density housing, which is across the interstate with Quarry Hill. So the U-Mall will look a lot different, I anticipate, in the next 10 to 20 years. This is on YouTube, and this is all public knowledge. But
does it look like they're going to do pretty extensive construction and replacement of existing buildings?
so everything's on the table right now. They were working through I don't know if the loan defaulted, but whatever the case may be, it was working through the courts for a while, bankruptcy courts, and now there's a new owner that bought about a year ago, and they've got the city at the table, and they're looking at a lot of different configurations.
TJ's in the waiting. TJ, okay, we can let TJ in. Now we can start our
Cross-country ski.
romp through the regulation of the utility. Oh, TJ, you have the view, I think it's the view behind me right now. Usually people come in with palm trees and make us feel bad.
I don't want to do
Yes,
that.
It's distracting, snow isn't. We had just, several members of this committee are new. It's been a while since we've done anything with renewable energy and just energy. We haven't done anything in energy regulation in a while. We've done some tweaking, but thought it would be helpful if we did a walkthrough of what is the state's role, how do we regulate them, what do they require, their renewable energy portfolios. After you, we have, no, that's PUC is coming in to talk about REC standard offer net metering, but I will let you just start us at the beginning and walk us through.
Sure. Sounds good. And for the record, TJ Poor, Director of Planning at the Department of Public Service. I So my understanding of what you wanted to hear was kind of an overview, the 101 of renewable energy standard, net metering, and the standard offer. And so I prepared for that today. We can get into any other issues, things like how we regulate or what the commission reviews in 248 cases they could talk about, or 248 is the statute that is governs siting of renewable energy projects. Or we could have Jim Porter come in to talk about that kind of legal process, if that's helpful. So, there's a lot about electric regulation, how rates are constructed and reviewed generally, that I wasn't planning on going over today, but we could come back and do a session on that.
This is just, I'm anticipating we're going to get some bills this year, and it's just better if we have a foundation before we find out we've got 2 days to knock out a bill.
Right.
Donald has a question.
While we're on the subject, once again, in the natural resources this morning, we were asking the question, why does Maine have the lowest electric rates in New England, notwithstanding our successes with the Efficiency Vermont program that brought us from the highest rates in New England to the next to the lowest? When you give us the briefing that the chair has asked for, do you have an answer yet for why Maine continues to have the lowest rates in New England?
Sure, I can answer that. And the first part is the first part of that question is that the rates are pretty close to Vermont's right now, that they're not necessarily the lowest anymore. And I can show you a slide that it's kind of in the appendix of what I sent over and what's posted on the screen, but is not what I was planning on covering. But I provided this. You remember a month ago I came in. The department came in just to kind of do an overview, and I showed a chart that had the average monthly retail cost of electricity across all sectors by state, and Vermont had Vermont and Maine were kind of neck and neck right now, with Maine going up and down, above and below Vermont. And you asked this question then, I followed up with email. And what I said in the email was there's a couple of reasons for that. Historically, because you're right, there's a long period where Maine had lower rates than Vermont consistently. And one part of that is really just the embedded resources and contracts in the state, and I didn't go into detail in that. But the other two parts that I think are a little more interesting, I think, is one, Maine has a higher customer density than Vermont, so more customers per mile of line. If you think about it that way, so that economies of scale speaks to lower the rates a little bit. And even though Maine is very rural, as you know, but they do have those population centers that can draw that down. And then two is that there are a lot of generation resources in Maine that are all trying to generate power and get them into Boston in particular. And the way the regional markets are set up, that sometimes those transmission lines are constrained, which the way ISO New England does prices, there's kind of load zones, and roughly each state, but there's 3 load zones in Massachusetts, that in Maine's load zone actually has a lower price than the rest of New England, because that generation can't always get out. And so kind of like the Sheffield Highgate exchange in the northern part of the state, exactly, SHIA. And so where even within Vermont, in different nodes, which make up the load zone, there are nodes that have lower prices than in the southern part of the state. And so those are a couple of the reasons. There's all kinds of other competing factors up and down in terms of just specifics to a particular state's demographic and geographics characteristics, of course. But I think those are the primary ones. That I can resend that email if it's helpful to get it to the top of your inbox.
Thank you. It's been frustrating. We're trying to keep up with that one. Appreciate the explanation you've given, and the next questions we might ask when we speak for this ISO New England is why Maine has not been directed to fix the constraints that play into their lower rates. Why isn't ISO New England supposed to not allow someone not to upgrade something because it serves them better as a state? So that's a question for another time.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up offline on that question also, but I think there's a lot to cover as it is here today, so maybe we should get into.
We should get moving.
Okay, so I would like to share my screen here. I'm not sure. Oh no, I do have. Sorry about that. Let me try and make this bigger for you. Okay, can you see the whole screen or the kind of presenter view
We've
here?
got
Presenter.
two slides up there.
Okay,
One says core policy programs and the other looks like your cover page.
okay. How about now?
That's good.
Better. Okay, great. So, thank you for having us in. So what I'm going to cover today starts kind of starts in 1999 with net metering when legislation passed there, but really Vermont's policy work in the renewable and clean energy sector starts back prior to that when the legislature passed requirements for least cost planning and integrated resource plans in the 80s and 90s and started to have a push towards energy efficiency, as Senator McDonald was referencing earlier, that required utilities to evaluate resources on an equal basis. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. Instead, I'm going to focus on these programs. So net metering started in 1999. It's been changed a number of times. I'll go into some detail there. In 2005, the legislature passed the SPEED program, Sustainably Priced Energy Enterprise Development Program. I'm not going to talk about it after this slide, but really what that did was encouraged utilities to enter into long-term contracts with renewable resources for delivery in Vermont. But what it didn't do is require the utilities to keep the attributes associated with that or the renewable energy certificates. So the utilities had to contract with the entity, but then they could sell the renewable energy credits, the rights to call that resource renewable to another utility in another state to meet other obligations. Effectively, that was replaced by the Renewable Energy Standard in 2017. And so I'm going to just focus on the Renewable Energy Standard, but I wanted to mention it as part of kind of the history of our renewable energy programs. And then in between in 2009 is when the standard offer program started. That's really what I call a centralized procurement program where government goes and procures resources and then requires utilities to purchase those resources. And I'll go into detail about all of these things here. But before I do is in how we frame these and how the department thinks about these is that the Renewable Energy Standard is kind of the umbrella policy now that sets the overarching requirements for increasing the supply of renewable energy that is claimed by our utilities in Vermont. And within that program, net metering is now kind of resources developed under the net metering program support achieving the requirements of the Renewable Energy Standard, which I may refer to as the RES as an acronym. The Standard Offer Program does the same thing, and other resources, including those that are just directly contracted by utilities, are developed and support the requirements of the Renewable Energy Standard. One more introductory thing. I'm really today just going to try and provide information without and be a technical resource without kind of trying not to put any kind of policy influence on it. I see today, whenever I hear 101, I just want to provide information, and we can come back another time, or if you want to ask me, I'm happy where we have one to give an opinion on things, but I really just want to try and provide information today.
Yeah, I think we should know something before we start asking questions.
Right. Great. I'm glad we're on the same page there. So I will start with the renewable energy standard, the most recent, because as I said, we look at that as the umbrella policy for the state. And what the renewable energy standard does is it requires our electric distribution utilities to purchase or own a specific amount of electricity generated from renewable resources. And it's outlined in 3 different tiers. I'll go into each of these tiers in a minute, but tier 1 within the renewable energy standard is kind of the umbrella tier. It's the total renewable energy requirement. Tier 2 is a distributed generation tier, and it falls within tier 1. And so the distributed generation means local in-state generation from small resources, which is under 5 megawatts. And tier 3 is the energy transformation tier, and that's a tier that requires electric utilities to cause fossil fuel reductions for their customers. So tiers 1 and 2 are really about their power supply procurement. Tier 3 is a more, the goal is reduction in fossil fuels by customers. And then how we measure compliance to these tiers for tier 1 and 2 requires that utilities retire renewable energy certificates to show that they're in compliance. And it was passed in 2015, the renewable energy standard, and it is, the requirement started in 2017. So renewable energy certificates, I just want to take a minute to say, well, what is a renewable energy certificate or credit? Renewable, every megawatt hour of generation, so every hour of energy produced by a generator in New England, whether it's renewable or not, has an attribute attached to it. And that attribute is tracked in something called the NEPOOL GIS. That's the NEPOOL Generation Information System, and NEPOOL is New England. And those with all states have a renewable portfolio standard or a renewable energy standard that use the NEPOOL GIS to track compliance. And what the renewable energy credit does is it demonstrates that someone created electrons coming from renewable resources. So every megawatt hour of generation is tracked, and those that are renewable are able to be used for compliance for different portfolio standards. They prevent 2 different entities from claiming credit for supporting the same resource. And like I said, they demonstrate compliance with the renewable energy standard. And when a megawatt hour is generated, it produces those electrons, but the renewable energy certificate can actually be either sold together with the electricity to an entity, to a utility, be bundled, or it can be unbundled and sold separately from the utility. So a generator could sell the energy to Burlington Electric Department, and they could sell the renewable energy credit to Green Mountain Power if they wanted to, or to an entity in Massachusetts. They did that. What a renewable energy credit is important because it's the basis for our renewable energy standards. So I just want to pause there and make sure that there's not any questions.
May I ask a question, Chair?
Okay, Senator Chittenden has a question.
Two questions: certificate and credit interchangeable terms, I'm assuming from this slide and the way you spoke to it. And then the second one is pricing of these RECs. Is it just an open market? Is there a platform for it? Is it just whatever somebody's willing to sell it for, and that's just negotiated between the two parties?
So yes, I think the technical term is actually renewable energy certificate, and I have been using those two terms interchangeably, and they can be used interchangeably. Second, the pricing is really a marketplace. What originally the theory behind the renewable energy certificates was that a generator needs to earn a return, right? It needs to be able to sell its products for enough money to pay for that upfront investment plus a return over time. And the energy markets and the capacity markets, the ISO New England markets were not at a high enough place to support renewable energy development. So I think if you could sell your energy for 6.5 cents, but you needed 10 cents to make your investment back, there's kind of a missing money problem. And the theory behind RECs was that, hey, now that we have a requirement, the pricing of RECs would be such that it would fill that gap and be 3.5 cents. And now the generator gets built, the credits kind of fill that hole, and then the utility ends up with both the power and the renewable energy certificate, or maybe not the power. The power goes on the grid. And ultimately, though, in terms of pricing, that it has evolved into kind of just a supply and demand thing. Every state has has different requirements and has different goals behind their portfolio standard. For many years, Connecticut has had a goal of supporting biomass, generation from biomass. And so there was a specific value, so they had a specific requirement, and there's a certain amount of attributes in the marketplace. And that supply and demand kind of came to a meeting point at around $25 a megawatt hour, 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And so it kind of just turns into a market dynamic.
Okay, TJ, the reason they have value is because if a utility doesn't have enough renewable energy to meet their state's portfolio standard, they can purchase these certificates to meet the criteria for their requirement.
Yeah, that's the idea, really, is that you set the targets, and those targets encourage development of resources, and so they have to purchase these. And if energy prices, hopefully they don't, if energy prices were sustained at a really, really high price for a while, then the REC price could be zero, theoretically, because developers don't actually need any more money in order to want to develop, and that the market could be flooded with resources. That's not happening now. Just an extreme example to show what could happen. In the other extreme, if energy prices were really low and the obligations were still really high, then not enough resources may be on the table or being developed, and so the price may go up more for RECs.
Any other questions?
I think Tom's hand was raised.
Senator Chittenden, I can't see you. Do you have a question?
I do, and since I think I'm the newest guy, I'm hoping that it's okay that I'm asking more questions, TJ.
That's fine. You're one of the newbies.
Excellent. So I think I just heard you say that other states have put different attributes or pricing on different types of RECs, being biomass is your example. And I'm seeing that, so that I'm taking from that Vermont could influence market behavior, including demand for RECs based on setting different standards on types of RECs. One question I'd have for you is there any precedent for a notion of pricing a solar panel REC differently or more valuable if it's a solar panel covering a parking lot, meaning dual purposing an impermeable surface, so that if solar panels are extended over an already paved space so as to reduce our overall stormwater creation and so on? Is that a crazy notion to have an additional value for solar panels that are covering already covered parking lots?
Right. So a couple of things. When I was talking earlier, that the states didn't actually set the price necessarily. They just set the requirement and let the supply and demand kind of meet the price. And so in that instance, yeah, you could set a requirement for a certain amount of resources that were developed on, we'll call them preferred sites, because I'm going to use that term later. And in that instance, that would create a demand for development on those sites, and then the supply and demand economics would kind of filter out to a certain whatever price is necessary to encourage that kind of development. We do in the net metering program. We'll see later. There's a whole category designation for preferred sites. And they do get a different rate for it in parking lots. Parking lots and parking lot canopies do qualify as a preferred site. And I think there were times in Massachusetts that a certain rate was set for what they called SRECs, solar renewable energy credits. And they did set a certain rate, and that's tough to do because market dynamics change. They set a rate that was actually relatively high. There was all kinds of demand. And the question, raises that, did they overpay? I mean, government has a tough time kind of doing things like picking technologies and setting prices. We do better when we set the structure and let the market kind of search for the lowest price.
Thank you.
That starts to go into opinion there. That's my opinion that the market dynamics work, but I think that blends general economics, I think, as well.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I think we can go on.
Okay. I do want to take a second to talk about how Vermont defines renewable, because renewable can mean different things to different people. So it's on the slide here, and I don't like to read slides, but I'll do it this time. Energy produced by using a technology that relies on a resource that is being consumed at a harvest rate at or below its natural regeneration rate. And so this includes things like geothermal, hydroelectric resources, solar, photovoltaics, wind power. In 2010, prior to 2010, this definition included a limit on the size of hydroelectric facilities that could be considered renewable energy. It was 200 megawatts. In 2010, the legislature lifted that requirement, or struck that requirement, I should say. And so that all renewable resources, or all hydroelectric resources, would be considered renewable. And so one thing that I'll just mention here is nuclear is explicitly in the statute not renewable, although in the lexicon in Vermont, that's often referred to as clean. And by clean, it just means that there's not carbon emissions at the site. It doesn't speak to life cycle. None of this speaks to life cycle. It's really just at the site emissions. And so I wanted to get that out there too.
Senator McDonald has a question.
In 2010, the size of the qualifying for being renewable and hydro resources, the metric was changed. And was that to allow Hydro-Quebec to qualify?
Probably. I wasn't working on these issues in 2010, so I believe so, though. That's my understanding.
I'm guessing it is also, why were we moved to make this change? Were Vermont Electric ratepayers given a financial windfall, or did we get a lot of green stamps or frequent flyer miles in exchange for making this designation?
Well, remember in 2010, we didn't have the renewable energy standard, in that speed program I talked about before didn't require us to keep any renewable energy credits. And so I don't think it was, we didn't get a credits associated with that. If I was, I can speculate that one of the reasons is that the big contracts with Hydro-Quebec were really set to expire in the 2010s. I don't recall the exact year, and that looking to renew those contracts, having such a definition could have been desirable at the time, but I'm not sure exactly.
Is this at the request of Hydro-Quebec, or
I don't
out of some?
know. I don't know who requested it.
Senator,
Yeah.
I have a feeling you know the answer to that question. Do you want to share it?
Well, I think we got some green stamps or frequent flyer miles, but I don't know
Could you
what they
say that
were.
in English?
That in exchange for changing the definition at the request of Hydro-Quebec, we got electricity more cheaply.
Yes.
And by changing the definition of what was renewable,
Was Hydro-Quebec ever defined as not renewable?
There was a time when it was not defined as renewable.
Yeah, TJ, I want to see, TJ, do you know, was it ever defined as not renewable, or was it just not defined?
Well, it was excluded from the definition of renewable energy. And even some of the resources from Hydro-Quebec would still qualify. They have some hydroelectric plants, I believe, that are less than 200 megawatts, but for the most part, their
Okay.
plants are bigger than 200 megawatts. So it was excluded from the definition of renewable in Vermont.
I think at this time, we were also working at closing down Vermont Yankee, which was a major clean, if not high, but it was carbon-free electric source. So we were losing a major supplier. And one of the goals of, in my memory, was there was a time when electricity was too cheap to meter, and we heated a lot of houses with it. And then it didn't become too cheap to meter, and a lot of those electric houses became a lot less desirable. And I remember being told that it was okay if the utilities went bankrupt about the time I joined this body, maybe slightly before. There was a major change in regulation and oversight of the Vermont utilities, and a major shakeup. Those utilities had owned Vermont Yankee, and there was a move to get electric rates down. And I think Hydro-Quebec came in as being a much cheaper, and at least at the point of generation, cleaner source of electricity. At the point where they're making electricity out of it.
some of those times were the ones that you've just recounted. The notion of the utilities going bankrupt. The utilities made a purchase with Hydro-Quebec without having it endorsed by what is now the PUC. The utilities said, we are so confident in what we're gonna do, we're gonna have your endorsement and we're gonna sign on and buy it without the endorsement. And in fact, it turned out that they were gonna be bankrupt because they made an error. And the subsequent action by the legislature and the regulators was that we bailed out those utilities from bankruptcy because we believed it was important to have our local utilities local here in Vermont. In exchange for bailing them out, the law said, should those utilities sell out to someone else at a windfall profit that the state of Vermont's ratepayers had paid for, had helped, had given them, made them not go bankrupt through ratepayer contributions, that the ratepayers would be repaid. And as things played out, that didn't happen. The ratepayers were not repaid.
That I was here for.
And so, I mean, that's,
In terms of how Hydro-Quebec got to be renewable, I don't remember, we had a rapid sequence of governors where Cunit's last year, and then Snelling was only in office for about 8 months, he died, and Howard Dean. Now, all three of them favored Hydro-Quebec, as I remember. And it was sort of, the judgment was made of the lesser evil. You had plutonium with nuclear power, you had a variety of problems with Hydro-Quebec, some of which were sociological, but also chemical, I mean, the release of elemental mercury and so on. And then you had everything else, you had the problems of carbon. And it was seen that Hydro-Quebec was seen in some quarters as the lesser of evils. And it was the linchpin of the deal for the energy policy that I signed on to Hydro-Quebec as a renewable, knowing darn well it wasn't. Just because that was the deal, officially, legally, it's designated
It's
as.
your definition of renewable.
Yeah.
Water is going down and coming up. How we got that water, what that water goes through causes issues.
Yeah, yeah,
But the water is not, it's not used up because it goes through the hydro.
It's- yeah, I
So in
mean,
that sense, it's renewable, but we're gonna have to let TJ finish.
and it's
this.
clean in that it doesn't put plutonium or carbon
Right.
into the atmosphere.
It does not blow
It
up.
just displaced
Yes, it
people.
displays people.
and utilities believed it would be less expensive. And they signed up for it, turned out they were wrong.
Okay. Actually, probably Vermont Yankee was the cheapest, so.
So I will say that contract that was signed in the 90s that Senator McDonald was referring to was, like he said, disallowed by the public. Originally wanted the costs associated with it to be disallowed for utilities, and exactly right. Ratepayers bailed them out. As history as time went on, that contract ultimately, it through the 2000s and up through the early 2010s turned out to be a relatively low priced resource. And over time, it was not as bad a deal as it seemed like it was going to be in the 90s. But that goes much beyond this slide here. And so I think if it's okay, we'll move on and get into
I
some
think
more
it's
detail.
good to move on.
So
Okay.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
just, there was a time before then when the Vermont House voted not to be a partner in the actual legal term of the words, partner, with Hydro-Quebec. And we declined not to join them and be an owner, part owner of Hydro-Quebec. It was by one vote. And the utilities, investor-owned utilities, lobbied against it, against the purchase, against us being part of that ownership.
Hindsight is always 20/20.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's do tier 1.
Okay, so tier 1 is the total energy tier of the renewable energy standard. So
And this is the portfolio that every utility has to have, right?
correct. The requirement for all utilities to have, it started at 55% of their retail sales, so the amount of deliveries to homes and businesses in 2017, and then increasing as it's on the books now to 75% in 2032. So as far as eligibility, it's any renewable resource as defined, like we just covered, that can deliver into New England. So either sited in New England or can be imported. And it doesn't matter when it was constructed. It can be an existing resource from 80 years ago, and it will count. So it's just the total energy. That obviously includes resources. Our utilities, and the state has contracts with New York Power Authority. Our utilities, as we all know, have contracts with Hydro-Quebec, and it includes those resources and was designed at the time to include those resources intentionally. And that's how it's been met. It's been met with those resources from HQ, from New York, and then other resources in New England. I'll show a chart exactly what resources in a minute. Like I said before, tier 2, which we'll get to, that distributed energy generation tier, is included within tier 1. So, through last year, the requirement was 59%. 2023, the requirement will be 63%. There is an alternative compliance payment. And so this is a structure that kind of goes through all the tiers, that if the price, the market price of those renewable energy certificates goes above the alternative compliance payment, then utilities can choose to pay that instead. That price is around $12 per credit in 2023. And thus far, the price has stayed below that, but they've increased a lot in the price for tier 1 resources recently. So historically, they were really cheap. Less than $1 for every renewable energy credit per megawatt hour, or 0.1 cents a kilowatt hour in 2019. And in the past year, they've been $5 to $9, or some purchases I saw were $10 for each REC. And so that's a penny for every renewable energy credit.
Jay, this tier 1 is the totality of the portfolio, must have this, and this, and then tier 2 and tier 3 come in with a microscope a little closer and start defining what can make up tier 1?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization.
Okay.
But it doesn't cover the entire portfolio is the only distinction. It's 75% of the portfolio in 2032 has to be renewable, and the other 25% can be whatever.
Okay, but of that 75%, the next 2 tiers are going to lay out what that should be included in there, right?
Correct. The
Fine.
next tier in particular.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
I don't know if this is a tier 2 question, but do we currently have a percentage of in-state renewable required?
It is a tier 2 question. I'm just going to go right to it. Yeah, thank you. So that requirement is 10% in 2032. So it started at 1% in 2017 and increases to 10% in 2032. And that, so when you put that within tier 1, 10%, there was a 75% requirement for in the total resources, and 10% of that needed to come from renewable resources connected to the distribution or subtransmission system in Vermont that are smaller, less than 5 megawatts in size. And they had to be new, so built, this legislation passed in 2015, they had to be commissioned and start generating after June 30th of 2015.
What's that chart up there?
So this chart, I put the charts in the corner, and the chart was on the previous one too. Those are the actual prices for the renewable energy credits in the marketplace. And so you can see in the chart that it's over time, and it goes from 2007 to 17. So it's a little older, but it's intended to show kind of the variability in what the renewable energy credits cost. And again, over time, there's different requirements from different states that are driving the prices. This distributed generation tier is a very Vermont-specific tier, but the resources that are built under this also qualify for the high-value tiers in other states or classes of requirements. And so, because we're part of that broader marketplace, that's really what drives the pricing of these resources if you're going to purchase them on the marketplace. And so, that price was as high as $65 a megawatt hour, 6 cents a megawatt hour in the 2010 timeframe, and dropped as low as a couple dollars a megawatt hour when there was a lot of resources coming online. Requirements changed and the price went back up. Currently, the prices are around $35 a megawatt hour, so 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
This is when we hear about the offshore wind was going to be coming online, and it was just going to blow all the prices because there was going to be so much. And
well, we'll see. There hasn't been any yet, but there's a lot of effort towards it for sure.
You would invest your money in the contract?
I'm
or
waiting
ratepayers?
to look out of my family's camp on the Cape and see a windmill tower. I just think it's going to be about as easy as putting windmills up the center of Lake Champlain.
Can I ask
So-
It's a good thought and probably should happen.
I just want to make sure, and maybe you said this, but who pays the $71.83 alternative complaints payment, and where does it go?
So nobody has paid this alternative compliance payment because the utilities have procured or purchased resources or purchased renewable energy credits to comply with the renewable energy standard. So they haven't had to pay. This is if they couldn't or didn't want to or forgot to comply with their obligations, then they would be required to pay this alternative compliance payment, and it statutorily is directed to the Clean Energy Development Fund.
Okay.
Okay.
So when you declare, when Hydro-Quebec was declared a renewable energy resource and thereby making it eligible for part of this program of having to have renewable energy credits, it created an advantage for some. And I think some people say by simply declaring that to be renewable, you've now allowed the people that own the electricity from there, whether they've purchased it by contract for the near future or they have it, are able to sell that as renewable, and that is viewed by some as sort of double counting, by not actually creating anything renewable or adding to the supply, but simply by changing the definition, you were able to sell the same horse twice. And I think that's the
The integrity piece.
what is fuels this this thing, and I think TJ will maybe help us understand that at some time in the future.
Yeah, I think you're putting the finger on a, oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? I couldn't hear. Okay, so I think
Are you saying that that's pretty much within the realm of possibility, and maybe later that'll be a.
well, I think you're putting a finger on an issue that is going to be and should be talked about going forward. But so in 2010 is when that definition changed, and in 2015 is when the Renewable Energy Standard passed, and Hydro-Quebec resources do qualify for this total energy tier that I went back to here, tier 1. And I think that my understanding is that that was part of the deal in passing the Renewable Energy Standard. Remember, we didn't have anything. We had the Sustainably Priced Energy Enterprise Development Program, where utilities could just sell the renewable energy credits. They didn't have any obligation to keep them. And so, so the contracts that they had entered into were given credit, for better or worse. They were given credit in this renewable energy standard because the utilities were already purchasing that renewable power, had long-term contracts for that. And so it was kind of counting it for the first time. They had never counted it in any sort of portfolio as we go forward. Now, whether that should continue, I think another issue related to that is whether, attributes above and beyond the contracts that utilities have should be counted, unbundled attributes, as I described them before. These are all issues that I think, as we discuss the best things to do with our renewable policy, will need to be sussed out. And it's probably not time to do that today, but I think you're putting your finger right on one of the hot button issues here.
Well, thank you for helping us understand that a little more, because some of the people that disagree with us, or what we have just been discussing is perhaps contributed to some of the rancor over what is and what isn't the moral and proper thing to do. Not making a judgment, but that's perhaps where some of the bad feelings originated. So thank you very much. Any other questions for TJ today?
I have one.
Who's gonna do two? Is there a third?
Or are you going to continue, TJ?
So we probably should do a time check. I have more slides than we can possibly get through by 3 o'clock. So I could probably finish the renewable energy standard portion of this, but not get into the standard offer or net metering.
Yeah, we'll do whatever you can get through. We probably could run over a little bit because I think the folks coming after you may be doing a lot of the same stuff.
Okay.
So feel free to take a couple extra minutes.
Okay, I'll go as long as you let me.
Okay. We won't ask any more questions or give any more history.
Well, I won't hold you to not asking any more questions, because I think it's good conversation. I think that's the whole point of this today, or at least I think so. So this is the 2021 compliance for tiers 1 and 2, and I'm not getting into tier 3 yet, because really tiers 1 and 2 are the power supply, where our electricity comes from questions. And so Let's start on the right side. Tier 2 is the distributed generation tier, and you can see that most of that is coming from solar. About 2/3 of it are coming from net metering resources, and then another third is coming from other solar resources like utility contracts or the standard offer program, which we'll get into at some point, maybe not today. And then a little slice for hydropower that qualifies. There's a couple of plants that came online in 2015 and a couple that were kind of repowered, small ones that were repowered that count. The tier 1 requirements, where do they come from? You can see only 4% of tier 1 in 2021 comes from those tier 2 resources. That's the requirement. I think in 2021, it was 3.5%, it's rounded. And most of the renewable energy certificates that were retired for compliance here were from Hydro-Quebec resources. We have other hydropower filled most of the rest of the gap. I think so. This slide is very related. I've shown a version of this every year for the last few years, or my predecessor did as well. But so how that translates to power supply, how clean or how renewable our portfolio is depends on how you're defining the question and how you're counting. And so on the chart on the left is what we call in the industry the physical delivery. So it's either the owned resources or contracted resources. Even if the electrons might originate in Maine, maybe the physical electron doesn't get to Vermont, but it's contracted to get to Vermont. And so either owned or contracted resources. That's the chart on the left, and you can see we have about a quarter of our power supply comes from Hydro-Quebec, and another 12% from other hydropower in New England or New York, and then about 10% each from solar, wind, and biomass. 18% comes from nuclear resources. That's mostly contracts with the Seabrook plant in New Hampshire. And then about 17% is unspecified. So those are kind of purchases, the net of purchases and sales on the ISO New England marketplace. So, if a utility has contracts for 90% of its power supply in any given hour, it needs to buy 10% of that on the marketplace in real time or the day ahead, or even a month ahead, but it's kind of unspecified. Those attributes, we don't actually know what's in that mix, and we just consider it kind of an ISO New England system mix. What's part of that mix is mostly natural gas. There are some renewable resources, but it's mostly natural gas. There's also some oil. On the right-hand side is based our power supply based on renewable energy certificate requirements. And you can see the difference here. The amount of renewableness actually isn't all that different, the green portion of these pies, but where that renewableness comes from is different. So we had we had about 3% solar. We had 50% from Hydro-Quebec and 17% from other hydropower. So this, and again, that ISO New England mix, that's all the attributes in New England that nobody has claimed. Nobody wants those. They're in that tracking system I talked about. Nobody wants those. Nobody claims them. So you say this is where your power supply comes from, and there's an emissions value associated with that. One other thing I need to say about this is our greenhouse gas inventory, as developed by Agency of Natural Resources pursuant to 10 VSA 578 and the Global Warming Solutions Act, and how our electricity emissions is measured in the Global Warming Solutions Act is based on the chart on the right. So based on our renewable energy credit retirements. And that is consistent with EPA best practice and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change best practice. I'm going to pause there for a second because the slide often has questions.
And we have had communications from the PUC. They say they're gonna cover a lot of what you're covering, and you're doing such a good job. Take all the time you need.
I'll have.
You're gonna live up to that now.
Yeah, well, I'll thank them for the compliment, and you know, Mr. Nauer can get me a beer later on if.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that comes up in this conversation is that we have, you know, 9.35% solar that is either contracted or owned by our utilities in Vermont, but really we're only counting that 3% of it. And so what's happening to the rest? Well, our utilities are maybe banking some of those. You can kind of save up some credits for a year or two. It's not forever, but they also could be selling some of those credits into other states if they're high value renewable energy credits, that selling them at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour serves to lower rate pressure. Biomass is probably maybe a good example, an easy one. We have 2 biomass plants in Vermont, the McNeil plant and the Rygate plant. You can see it's 7.5% of our power supply on the left chart. It doesn't show up on the right chart because our utilities, who get most of the RECs from Rygate and get all the RECs from McNeil, sell those credits into the Connecticut marketplace, which is a higher value, and then effectively replace them by with the hydropower credits that you see on the right-hand chart. And they do that because, again, 25 cents, 2.5 cents, 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour, they can sell those biomass credits for, and then they replace them with the hydro credits, which are 0.5 cent to 1 penny in the last year for the hydropower.
Okay. Questions?
Is Rygate filed for bankruptcy?
So Rygate is owned by it's an independent LLC that is owned by a company called Stored Solar. That company, Stored Solar, filed for bankruptcy in Maine several months ago, and I guess that's the answer to the question.
I'm not sure this is the right time for this question.
Just based on what you've explained to us about credits and et cetera, would Rygate become an asset to someone who to own, because anybody that bought Rygate would then have these renewable energy credits to sell?
Well, so Rygate is part of the standard offer program. That's a provision of the standard offer program that is called the baseload renewable power requirement. And what that does is require the Public Utility Commission to enter into a contract with the plant, and then utilities need to then purchase that power from the Public Utility Commission. It's kind of passed through the commission, if you will, through that centralized procurement. With that contract, as it currently stands, 90% of the renewable energy credits go to the state and then to the utilities. 10% are retained by the owners of the plant. So in a small proportion, yes, the 10% of those credits are of value to the plant owner. They do need to operate a control system that in order to continue to secure those renewable energy certificates. They only got them when they installed kind of this emissions control system on the plant, kind of scrubbers for the stack emissions, if you think about it that way. And that does have costs to operate, so that's a trade-off as well. That's why they get 10% of it.
Thank you.
Okay, can we go on, I think, to the next slide?
Okay, so we'll go on to energy transformation. This tier is not a power supply tier, so completely separate. It's not about utility procurement of electricity. This is a way for utilities to support fossil fuel reductions for utility customers. Eligible measures are things like electrification measures, vehicles, and heat pumps. We see a lot of sugaring operations where utilities support line extensions to the sugaring operation where they were running diesel generators all spring in order to boil their sap. Weatherization could count, and you can also use tier 2 renewable energy certificates to qualify. The way this is measured is it's a megawatt hour equivalent requirement. And so there's a calculation that's done by a technical advisory group, or actually the calculation I believe is in statute, and that converts fossil fuel reductions into megawatt hour equivalent. And then you have a percent reduction to create the requirement. It starts at 2% of retail sales in 2017 up to 12% in 2032. There's an alternative compliance payment. Again, it's kind of the maximum that utilities are allowed to spend on these types of measures and incentives for these measures. And there's really a wide range of what utilities are paying in incentives, particularly for electric vehicles and also for heat pumps. Not everybody's getting kind of a $500 rebate. All utilities are offering that, but they do range from a much higher amount to even lower than $500. So this average cost here was $32 a megawatt hour equivalent, so 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour in 2021. That's the gross cost. So that's kind of the administrative cost plus the incentive cost in order to encourage the thing to happen, whether it was a heat pump or an electric vehicle. That doesn't count the kind of benefits coming back to the utility of the revenue generated by an electrification resource, like a heat pump or a vehicle, where revenues are potentially coming in above what it costs to serve that power.
Okay.
So this is the last renewable energy standard slide for now. I do have some later on overall costs that incorporate kind of net metering and standard offer, but so this is tier 3 in 2021, the types of measures that were installed. And you can see by this, it was predominantly heat pumps. That big blue chunk is kind of the cold climate heat pump that you hear about all the time. Those ductless mini splits that are happening very frequently these days. That orange portion is our whole building heat pumps. So, if you have a furnace system, a forced hot air system with ductwork, that is a good potential for a heat pump system that can actually serve the whole building, which is really, you can actually reduce your fossil fuel percent by up to 100%, where those other heat pumps are 20 to 40%, depending on their size and the house characteristics. And then there's a mix of other measures that include the EVs, electric vehicles. It includes, the line extensions include those to sugaring operations, like I spoke of earlier, and battery storage as well.
Okay.
Okay, so we're at kind of a natural stopping point. I could continue to talk about the standard offer program and then net metering. or just
Well,
answer questions, up to you.
Think, I'm looking at my agenda, we've asked the PUC to come in and talk about standard offer net metering. So maybe we'll give you a break and switch to them. Are they still?
James just entered the meeting. Thomas hasn't joined yet. But I believe he's watching the YouTube stream.
So they will probably be in momentarily. So this is a good place, because we've done the tiers with you. We can get into greater detail with the PUC. Does that work?
That works for me if they're ready to go. And yeah, I'm happy to come back again to go over this again or other
We're
stuff
happy
or start to
let
get
you
into the
deal with
policy.
us, But they're filtering back in.
Okay.
Okay. So committee, we can stand at ease for 2 minutes while we get people admitted into the Zoom room.
Welcome.
Yeah, we've still got TJ up there. And then I'm assuming our 2 Zooming members are there.
I will stop my video. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll see you again. Thank you.
We'll see you. Okay, all right. I got Jim, okay, and Tom Nauer. All right, and I've got my committee, so we're doing a lot of Zooming today because of weather. So welcome. Good. Just have both of you. I assume you may have some coordinated presentation, so just introduce yourself for the record and help us all understand REC standard offer, net metering, renewable, well, we did the standard tiers, but I think it might help some of us to hear about them again. Because it takes a while for it to absorb, and I understand them better now than when we had a bill and 3 days or to redo the whole tier requirements. So welcome, and I don't know who you want to have go first, Jake or Tom.
Sure, I'll begin. Good afternoon to the committee. Thank you for inviting us to come in and testify. My name is Tom Nauer, and I'm the policy director at the Public Utility Commission. And I'm joined by Jake Marin, who's a staff attorney and a deputy general counsel at the commission. So first off, I want to say TJ was doing a great job, and I invite him to join us or jump in at any point if he has something he would like to add to the testimony that I or Jake gives to the committee. I have a very strong feeling that we would say very much the same thing, but you know, we're 2 different agencies, and so he might have something different to say
I
about.
think that's what our challenge was, is who do we invite, because you both work with this entire system.
Right, and I know TJ began his presentation saying he was appearing for the purpose of offering information rather than commentary or opinion, and Jake and I are appearing with very much the same mission to provide whatever information we can to the committee members.
I think, yes, we are looking to understand when bills come before us. I hope you will come either to support or not, or that's a different mode.
Right. And TJ, I know TJ has been involved in the public service department's kind of public engagement on looking at Vermont's renewable policies. And so he's got great visuals and presentations. Jake and I are here mostly with notes and what we have in our minds. So Jake, you didn't prepare any presentation, right?
Okay, so no screen sharing. Just people, okay.
Right. So in my note, the order that I saw the committee was looking to discuss these topics. First up was RECs, and you know, my notes would have covered exactly what TJ covered for Rex. So I'll just second what he said and offer ourselves for any questions that the committee has.
Okay, there was a lot of brouhaha a number of years ago about Rex and double counting and can you explain how we, or did we work our way out of that? But it didn't hit this committee, it hit natural resources, so is there anything you could, right now, we are not double counting Rex, or we are not.
So the way I would say is, in the past, as TJ explained, there was the SPEED program, where Vermont's utilities were encouraged to enter into long-term contracts with renewable generators. There was not a mandate for the utilities to retire any of the renewable attributes. And so the utilities were free to do with those attributes as they pleased. And then that all changed when the Vermont lawmakers passed the, I think it was Act 56 back in 2015 that mandated the renewable energy standard that TJ just spent a while discussing. And under that system, Vermont utilities are required to actually retire RECs, either from generating resources that they own or other resources in the region with which they have contracts. And the way that we avoid double counting is by registering those generators through the NEPOOL GIS system, which tracks whenever a REC is minted and creates a legal pathway of ownership that, you know, only one entity can own those RECs at a time.
Only one?
Okay. So, and retire means if you don't sell it by a certain amount of time, you can't just hold on to these, you have to use them or they go away. What does retire mean?
That's a question that goes a bit beyond my knowledge of the actual the mechanics of the system, but it means essentially I'm going to hold on to this REC that I own, and I'm deciding not to put it on the market for everyone else.
Okay. All right. So that, all right, so you cease selling them. And so you have to have a certain number a year that
Correct.
you don't sell. So you can't build up this huge storehouse of RECs. Okay. Senator
Does anyone keep track of how much renewable energy has been created by this program scheme?
So each year we get filings from the utilities that tell us, exactly how much renewable energy they are claiming for compliance towards their portfolio. I think that's slightly different, maybe than what you're asking.
How much new renewable energy is being created because we're promoting its sale and value? Is that?
I don't think any of the renewable energy standard requirements would capture that information.
I'm sure somebody knows how many new solar fields go up, how many, if nothing else, the utilities would know when they have to buy from a different renewable energy source. Okay, well, that's a question to put out there. Who's tracking?
I would hope somebody on this call does know that.
Well, I would add that the NEPOOL GIS system is probably capturing almost all of these.
Okay.
All renewable, not all, but the vast majority of renewable resources that qualify for any state program are going to be registering in that system where they're then tracked. I'm hedging and saying almost all because I guess it's hypothetically possible that a utility could just or a generator could hold on to those RECs and never register them and sort of de facto retire them without using them to meet any goals. Maybe like a corporation that had a corporate sustainability goal wouldn't need to do that. But I would still expect almost everything to go through NEPL GIS.
Okay, so when you sell to the grid, when you sell somewhere, the minute one of your little electrons hits the wires, you are registered with NEPL. So NEPL would know when a new source came online. Right?
My understanding of the mechanics are a little fuzzy on this, but I think the way it actually works is that when a new source is commissioned, they would actually first register with NEPL GIS. So even before they've started producing, they're going to identify themselves to NEPL GIS. Say, I'm a solar array in such and such a location. I exist. And then when they produce, that production is metered by their utility and possibly by ISO New England as well. That metering data is getting sent to NEPL GIS, where when they see, oh, you generated a megawatt hour, they mint the REC, and then that gets put into their system, and then they can you can then track where it goes, who owns it, and who's using it to meet their state requirements.
And they track it by source, so they
by generator.
New solar came on, etc.
Yeah, I think you could find it by different technology as well.
Yes, in New England.
How are they, what's their name?
Part of the New England regular, that's probably the next 101 we have to get, which is the entire New England power grid.
I remember from.
And NEPL buys, can you help us remember that? NEPL, there's a grid, we all feed into it, that we all buy from it.
We don't contribute to paying for stuff done
For poles and wires.
throughout the area based on a percentage of our usage.
This all started with the blackout of
The New York?
No, well, the whole Northeast blacked out, probably before you were born, but I was in college. And on a trolley in Boston when everything went black. Yeah, no, it would have been, no, it would have been 65, 66.
Freshman year.
Yeah.
5 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah, 5 o'clock, black. And the whole Northeast, New York, everything. And this has been, we are now more connected, more reliable. It's a much more regulated system, except maybe Texas. But they're regional, as I'm remembering, because we couldn't buy cheap coal-fired power from the Midwest. There's a physical limit to how far you can transmit electricity.
Well, you just lose so much every month.
Well, that it peters out. But
Sort of like
yeah, and NEPL is part of that.
loses its.
Velco owns the transmission lines into Vermont. So they own the lines. NEPL regulates the power. And we all have representatives on all the boards. And
A slight clarification, if I may. I think maybe you're referring to ISO New England.
ISO New England is the other, yes.
And that's kind of the reliability regulator for the region. And NEPL is more looking at the generators and who's putting what onto the grid and minting these RECs that we've been discussing.
And they're tracking the sources.
Correct.
Of generation. Yes, and IPL does make sure that the electricity keeps flowing everywhere. And when we shut down Vermont Yankee, we put a big crib in that transmission system, and it's taken a while to reroute, go around it. No, that's right. They left. They shut themselves down. But it did put there was some transmission issues we had to deal with.
Back within the year before Yankee shut down the natural gas generating facility down around Middletown, Connecticut or so, blew up. And it exploded and didn't go online, and its capacity was essentially the same as for what Yankee's capacity.
Those we lost both.
And that happened. The world didn't come to a screeching halt.
But it keeps us all
On our toes.
interconnected. And it is a regional system. Okay, we won't get into the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or any of those other good things. All right. So
So
we're
I
back
know
to you.
there-
We do
there was a-
digress in this committee, but
Let's not digress.
there's a lot, it's very technical. It doesn't all happen in one committee, and a lot has changed over time. But it all is connected. So we'll keep going.
Right, and TJ had put something in the chat where he had some input on one of the questions that was asked several minutes ago. So TJ, if you wanted to jump on, that would be fine
Is
by
TJ
us.
around? We can let him in. There's TJ, okay.
Sure. I think the question was whether somebody is tracking the amount of projects and the number of megawatts that have been encouraged by the renewable energy standard. And the department tracks that and has put it in our annual energy report that we do every year. What we track is the amount of projects that are in the net metering program. We track the amount of projects that are in the standard offer program and that are developed elsewhere. I think we can't really, it's really hard to distinguish kind of which projects are attributable to, the renewable energy standard. These standard offer projects probably would have happened anyway. That program was in place. The renewable energy standard came in 2015. Was passed in 2015, compliance started in 2017, but there was a number of projects that came online in the summer and fall of 2015. So, and they count towards the renewable energy standard compliance, but that wasn't really the driver, but behind those projects. So I actually think that is a really difficult number, and I don't think anybody tracks kind of the number of projects that the renewable energy standard has created or promoted. I think you can kind of just add up the total amount of generation or capacity, the number of plants and their total capability, and see how that's changed over time with different requirements. But getting a specific number to one, I think, will be not an easy task.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? Okay, it might be helpful. I think we've done RECs and the renewable energy standard and tiers. Standard offer. So can we move on to that and what that is?
Sure, I'd be happy to give you an overview of that program. The standard offer program has been around in various versions for over 10 years now. It's like TJ described it, it's this sort of state mandated procurement process. And what it says is that the utilities of Vermont are going to purchase energy from up to 127.5 megawatts of new renewable energy projects located in Vermont. And the way that is going to happen is that the Public Utility Commission is going to sign those contracts with those new plants, and those contracts are going to allow those plants to be constructed. It's going to sort of provide the financeability necessary to build those new projects. We've accomplished that using a couple different mechanisms over the years. In the initial version of the program, it was limited to 50 megawatts, and basically the commission held a lottery. We said, anyone who wants to get a contract, put your name in the hat, and we'll draw your name out of the hat, and the winners will get these contracts. The prices in those contracts were set originally by the legislature, and then later by administrative order from the commission. And in the initial years of those projects, those administratively set prices were rather high, on the order of almost 30 cents a kilowatt hour, because at the time, that is what it was calculated it would be necessary to pay a plant for it to be a profitable enterprise. Over the years, the cost of technology has decreased substantially, and starting in 2012, this program was expanded to include another 70 or so megawatts of new plants, and the commission was directed to use a market-based mechanism to set the price for those new projects. And so for the past 10 years, the commission has held an annual request for proposals, an RFP, where we solicited a certain amount of new projects and let them bid. And we selected the projects with the lowest prices. As a result, the price of the standard offer program projects has decreased substantially. The most recent RFP we held in 2022, the winning bids were for solar projects, and they were at about 8 cents a kilowatt hour. At the end of the 2022 RFP, we had actually issued contracts for the statutory authorized amount of capacity in the program, 127.5 megawatts plus or minus 1 or 2. So basically, the commission is now in the process of seeing those projects through to commissioning, construction, and operation. And there is an entity called the Standard Offer Facilitator who's responsible for making sure that those projects are paid for their output and the utilities pay for it, and that the utilities in exchange receive the energy and the renewable energy credits and capacity from those projects. The Standard Offer program was designed also to encourage a diversity of fuel technologies in Vermont. So not just solar participates, though solar has been the largest participant. We had special technology carve-outs for wind projects, small wind and large wind, up to 2.2 megawatts. Also for food waste anaerobic digesters, landfill methane projects, and any other technologies that I'm missing, Tom? I'm going to get to hydro and cow power also in a second, but besides those, that might be it. I'm stepping away from sort of the competitive price process that I just described. The standard offer statute also creates essentially a feed-in tariff for small hydro facilities and cow power projects. So if you have a farm digester, or if you have a small hydro facility, you can come to the commission at any time and receive a contract with a rate in it, and it will be a fixed rate contract for 20 years for those projects. And there's no limit on the amount of capacity that those projects can participate. However, we haven't had any new hydro or cow power projects in recent memory. I think all of the available sites have either been developed or are participating in other programs such as net metering, which I'll describe next. Tom, is there anything else you think I should add about standard offer before I solicit questions?
No, I think you've covered it, Jake.
Okay.
Get a question?
No, I have a clarification.
Okay.
Standard offer, what the first year was at 30 cents a kilowatt hour, and it was done by lottery as reported. The next year, it was brought back to us at a lower rate, and I'm just going to say 29 cents instead of 30 cents. And Natural Resources in this committee balked and said no, that we were not going to do that by lottery again. There had to be some reason for picking one over another. And we proposed some reasons being more compatible to the grid and easier to hook up. And it was a couple of years later that the standard offer was no longer standard, where you announced the price and you had a lottery or whatever. they instituted a competitive auction, which is we will allow the people who agree to provide this renewable electricity at the lowest price will be the ones that get paid. There was a significant savings and competition that replaced the original standard offer. And it's often forgotten, and it usually is a worthwhile principle when it can be used. Is that fairly accurate?
Yes, I agree with that.
I guess the question that raises for me is why a lottery? Is that still happening? Why is it?
No, the lottery was always only.
Anticipated the number of people that would rush
Oh,
to do this. It's perhaps fair to say that the utilities poo-pooed the idea, didn't want to get involved in it.
Okay.
And lo and behold, there were folks out there dying to get in, and we didn't have a mechanism to do it at the lowest possible.
The
Right.
original one was the solar people said, there's a significant capital investment to putting in a solar field. And we can't get investors. We can't do that unless we know there's a market for our product.
And
So the sta-
manufacturers too.
Yeah, so the standard offer said, okay, we will guarantee you, you know, this price, which was the 30 cents. And then we've gone from there, and there are also federal tax credits and state tax credits, and I think the federal was going away. And so it was all to encourage solar, understanding that they had to know they could cover the cost of their investment and sell their product in what is a closed market. You have to sell to a regulated utility. And so, and then as the manufacturing matured and the technology matured, we've cut back on our corporate welfare.
Price went down and
Yeah.
people bid to provide it at a lower price. And I think, I'm sure that this program was modeled on the one that we often criticize today for the first hydropower, which is started at 30 cents. Now,
The
people that
small
do
hydro was
hydropower.
very high, yeah.
Well, that was to get people interested in doing small hydro.
This
And
was.
today, it's, the hydropower gets the, a blend of what electricity costs. It's no longer, it's got people interested.
Hydropower came out with a 30-year contract, and that was the oil embargo. Yeah, that we were incenting local American fuel. Okay, Senator Chittenden.
Thank you, Chair Cummings. I honestly was lost until you just sort of crystallized it, that this was just the state agreeing to purchase at a certain price point to reduce uncertainty for small upstart projects. But it begs the question that I think Senator McDonald, and again, I can play the new guy card on this. Is this moot? And now that there's, as of 2023, no new solicitations are scheduled, and a lot of these projects are now, or these technologies are matured, why do we still need standard offered in our policy portfolio?
It's not standard, it's bid.
Okay, why don't we let the PUC people?
Well, I mean, at this point, the program has, been accomplished. I think its original goal, which was to result in 127.5 megawatts of new resources being built within the state, and that we're well on our way to completing that. And so, if the legislature takes no further action, those contracts will run for another 25 years, and then that will be it.
Okay, might be a good time to go on to net metering.
Okay. So net metering is sort of the other big program that the commission administers that it relates to in-state renewable energy. I think if you look back at TJ's slides, it's the largest source of tier 2 projects in the state. There are over 300 megawatts of net metering systems in the state. Now, when we say net metering system, that means solar panels on a customer's roof, like you might see, but it also can mean larger arrays up to a 0.5 megawatt in size that you might see in a field. And so I'll back up for a second for for folks who don't know what net metering means, net metering is a billing arrangement. It means a customer owns a generating resource, a renewable generating resource, usually solar, but it could be a wind project, it could be a hydro facility, it could even be, like a methane digester if you had one. I don't think there are anybody's net metering one of those, but you could. The customer then, buys power from the grid when they need it, and when their generator's running and making power, it goes onto the grid. And when they put power onto the grid, the utility measures that and gives the customer a credit on their electric bill for that power that's been produced. The details of the program come in when you talk about, well, what rates are the customers who are doing these generator customers, what rates are they paying for power, and what rate are they being credited for the power they put onto the grid? Net metering's been around since 1999, and when it started, it was described as rolling your meter backwards, meaning you got a 1-for-1 credit. If I put a credit onto the grid in the morning, when I use a credit at night that day, it's a net zero, a washout. I don't get billed anything because I produced 1 credit, 1 kilowatt hour, and I used 1 kilowatt hour. And so I would have.
When we were doing this, we were looking at methane digesters on farms. It's changed since then. I think you saw it, the percentage that we get from methane or cow power. But that was the level we started at when we started talking about allowing the farmer to get credit and sell his excess on to the, we had to get money to get 3-phase power out to the farm so that they could afford to do this.
So,
Get it from the farm.
the net metering program started out very small with a lot of these, small home solar arrays or maybe a farm system. But in 2011, things started to get interesting. The cost of solar technology was starting to come down such that residential customers were more likely to be able to afford it. And at the same time, Green Mountain Power Corporation had identified a need for power in the middle of the day. They had a peak in the middle of the day that was driving some of their costs. And so to them, it was actually worth more than paying just a 1-for-1 credit. There was actually value to getting these extra resources online in the middle of the day. So they offered what was called a solar adder, which was that, so when I generate my kilowatt hour in the morning, I would get a credit for 1 kilowatt hour, plus I would get an extra 6 cents put on my bill just as a monetary credit put on top of it. So then if I used a kilowatt hour at night, I'd still have 6 cents left over to maybe offset my customer charge or some other part of my bill. The legislature took note of that and made that law in 2011. So starting in 2011, any net metering customer was going to get this incentive payment on top of their 1-for-1 retail rate credit. And that spurred tremendous growth in the net metering program. There's the Department of Public Service sent on January 15th, I think, a report about the net metering program to the legislature. You can see in it, there's a graph that shows you the annual pace of development. And you can see starting in 2011, the bars go from this little big to very big really quickly. Things start to really take off. In 2014, the legislature, I think, realized that the program needed to evolve to remain sustainable going forward. The amount of new resources coming online were significant. And so at that time, the legislature directed the PUC to come up with a revised net metering program and included in that direction instructions to change the credit rates. So starting in 2017, we began what is called Net Metering 2.0 in Vermont, where we started a system of credits that are still based on the customer receiving a retail credit for each kilowatt hour that they produce. However, that credit could be adjusted up or down based on several decisions the customer makes, including whether they elect to retain the renewable energy credits produced by the system, and also whether the system is sited in a manner that is less environmentally impactful. We call those preferred sites. So the commission, created incentives for people to put these projects on their roofs, in a gravel pit in an already disturbed area as opposed to out in the middle of a green field or in a forest. So that program has been now running for about 5 years. During that time, the commission has slowly adjusted those incentive payments to address both the pace of development and also to ensure that the program doesn't result in undue impacts to other ratepayers. Because over time, the value of the generation that's coming online during the middle of the day has changed. The peaks are no longer during the middle of the day during the sunlight hours. We have this duck curve now. There's more value to power being produced later in the day, but not so much in the middle of the day. So the commission has started to wind down some of those incentives. At the same time, the cost of building solar arrays has continued to plummet. So we've still seen people purchasing these systems because they're cost effective to put in. I guess one other update on that is that the commission is continuing to evaluate that program. We have an open rulemaking right now. It's focused on our siting procedures, mostly streamlining our permit process. We process thousands of net metering applications a year. And so we're always trying to make that process as simple and easy as possible for applicants and also for the commission and stakeholders. So I just a heads up that I think the committee's jurisdiction, may see a rulemaking from us in the next year or so.
Chair comments.
Senator Chittenden.
Could you elaborate on what speculation there might be regarding the shift in peak management throughout the day? It's why it's shifted, and is there any load management strategies or technologies that we might want to be looking at from a policy perspective to motivate or incent more daytime hour peak demand?
Yes, there are a lot. So, first, the change in daily load is a direct result of developing solar in Vermont and the region. That's been the largest new source of energy, I think, in the region for several years now. So it's having a measurable impact, and that's a good thing. We have a rulemaking going on about storage right now, which is going to be essential. The utilities like Green Mountain Power have implemented programs on their own to encourage customers to bring their own device, install a storage unit at their system to help them target those peaks that are happening after sunset. Utilities have also installed their own battery storage systems to do that. On the horizon, at the federal level, FERC has issued something that's called Order 2022, which is going to integrate the use of distributed energy resources like batteries into the wholesale markets at a regional level. And so we anticipate seeing development at regional markets that's going to create ways for people to make money doing this. And so we expect that to happen over time.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we did renewable energy. Anything else we should know before we start working on bills?
I would say from the commission's perspective, we've provided information, based on the committee's request this week, but we're always happy to come back and provide additional information or answer questions as bills land in the committee or in advance of that. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you. I think this was very helpful. That we won't need a refresher, or some of this won't. It's long and complicated, and we tend to get very involved one year and then not do anything for 2, and then come back and do something very involved another time. But the entire industry is growing and evolving. So we will see what we will see. Committee, and thank you, James and Tom. You can go on unless you want to stay and talk about the committee schedule for the next meeting.
I'll leave that to you. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. committee, it's my plan to try and get everything we're going to get out next week. And because we've got the one large complicated bill we have is the project-based TIFs. And I think that's gonna take us some focused time. So the last week I'd like to do that, but if childcare or something else, because there's a couple bills out there that will have to go both here and to approach, which means we basically have 2 days to deal with them. And so I'll just give you my rundown of what we're looking at. The town of Hartford can't come until next week, next Friday. That's next Friday. And they are in between city managers. They are filling this. But this to me is not just a renewal. This is a second renewal. So that sets a precedent. And that does remove capacity for other towns to do it. No, we did that. Local option taxes. We asked the tax department to come in, but unless I have a feeling this committee's gonna vote it out, the Senate's voted it out at least twice, maybe 3 times.
This is local option light.
Yeah, well, this just says, now that everybody can do Amazon sales online, you don't have to have a significant retail establishment in your town to benefit that. Why not let the towns? The one question is the taxing capacity. The RAND study said raise the sales tax. And if our effective rate, if most of the towns do it, which they probably have already because we keep allowing them to do that. But that's one I think will probably be up or down. I don't think we're gonna do the fertility related services.
Yeah.
The lobbyist doesn't think so. I've asked Amarin Abergele to see if she can do a quick search and find out how other states cover them or to what extent.
I'd just like to know that
Yeah.
for the future, but I don't.
I have asked her that. Let's see, epinephrine. I did check with the representative from Blue Cross Blue Shield who said, well, that one they weren't too concerned about, but there are other things apparently connected to probably S66, is that the Shield bill?
Yeah.
There was no copay for abortions
Wait,
or
I think it's 66 is the education.
what is the one I'm getting
What's
all
bill?
there's an S and an H bill, the Shield bill,
I
whatever.
think that's
the-
S37.
Okay.
I'm usually not good at numbers, but I'm pretty sure
I am
S66
not good at
is
numbers.
more
Tell
controversial.
me the topic.
Yeah.
I don't know the numbers of my other bills.
Yeah. So anyway, that bill at one point had, because remember she said it's not that one, it's other proposals.
Mhm.
There was a proposal for no copay for abortions and no copay for trans surgery.
Mhm.
The trans surgery is very expensive, big one. That's what made the fertility
Yeah.
thing get surrogates. So she understood that that was out. That,
Oh, okay.
but that's, I'll check with Senator Lyons tomorrow morning. Just.
Wait, trans affirming care? I don't
No,
know. Oh, okay.
transgender, like surgical.
Reconstructive
Yeah,
surgery. is-
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think pharmaceuticals is a big issue.
Right,
Yeah, that,
blockers.
yeah, that kind of thing. But I will check with them, but it's the cumulative effect of say no co-pays for
Yeah.
a large number, a large amount of money, which will cause them to have to put higher co-pays on other people who need equally important
Right,
services.
yeah.
So it's finding out how much is out there. I'm not doing this candy or the sweet and soda things until we find out how much money we might need to raise. We're gonna get the student loan payment deduction, forgiveness, not tax it. I've asked for a fiscal note, I believe tomorrow, but I'm afraid that's gonna be high enough. So that's a good idea, but if we've got to raise millions of dollars to do housing and childcare and paid family leave, I don't know if we can afford to do it. That's, all right. Yeah, surcharge of non-primary dwellings. The House is working on one of those bills, so I think that's one we can wait on. I haven't heard it may not come with a charge on it, but
A differentiated rate.
yeah, that it'll, I think it's gonna at least come as separate listings. Okay. Yeah, the TIF bill, I think we're gonna have to spend time on.
Do you want to combine all the TIF stuff or keep them separate?
I've only got, no, I wanna keep it separate. The Barry is coming in sometime. We did get the Barry bill. I'm getting them in as soon as we get them in next week. I don't know what their ask is or what their project is. But we'll hear it. And then banking and insurance, the housekeeping bill we've got tomorrow. There's one amendment that I have been told that the department doesn't oppose, they just don't want to put it on their housekeeping. So Jamie Fian's gonna bring that in, I think have a representative from Boston, it's the Boston Federal Bank. Anyway, I told him he could Zoom, but he thought he might like to be here, so. I'm hoping we can, that is a housekeeping bill unless something untoward pops up, I'd like to get that out ASAP. And then have some time to work on the mini TIFs.
Yeah.
Cause that gets more complicated.
And I just want to say for the benefit of the whole committee and just to make sure with my morning counterparts, we're clear on this. I have told leadership that the housing bill shouldn't need to come here. That we tried to take anything.
Yeah, I don't think you don't.
They still have it a question in their mind. And I
Okay,
said,
well,
I don't think our
Just the natural resources.
natural resources are pros.
yeah, go to a process, but there's no taxes.
There's no taxes and there's no grand list studies and there's no,
Well, we wouldn't even get into a grand list study that.
well, it was the like adding number of units to the grand list. And we even took that out.
Yeah,
because
that's right, cause that got very
That's a bigger
hard.
conversation.
The immunity, belt and suspenders rule, move of running past Secretary Bloomer, he's on the flags.
That might have been how it came back to us, Flag, but I'll check with him directly, because judiciary is getting a one-line pass through, look, fly by.
But I can't think of anything.
Yeah. I'll
I
check.
think every time I said that, we get it sent to finance, it came out.
Right, yes. Yeah, I mean,
But
poor
I
Tom
mean,
is the
it's-
only person who won't have seen it by the time it gets to the floor thoroughly to this committee, so. You know, as long as you're okay, Tom, I've been keeping him updated since we share a district.
So it's, it will depend, but I can't think of any reason it will come here. What's in the underlying bill?
There may be the
There
committee
is
bill.
no underlying bill.
Yeah.
Okay, what was coming to me?
Thought ahead.
What, something
Yes.
came up in chair's meeting that was gonna come here, and I said, why? Cause there was a
Oh, yeah.
fee in the underlying bill.
Right, what was that?
Which, if you stand me up and ask to see me be relieved of it
Right.
without having a chance, since we are down to the end, I think it was something from health and welfare.
Oh, yeah, it was, insurance rates, the underlying bill had insurance rates in it.
That's right. There was something in insurance
But I still can't
rates, but
remember
it's
what it
not in there. So, if that's coming up to the floor, I don't, if somebody wants to take it in, tell me, but, for something, I mean, I really wanted to mess in
Oh,
something
it was
else.
reproductive shield.
It was
It was shield
reproductive
because
shield.
there's insurance rates.
Okay.
So we are getting.
So maybe, no.
We're not getting, so we, yeah.
So maybe they took the no co-pays for everything out. If there's co-pays for something, if it affects co-pays, we'll get it.
Okay.
So I will get in there in time to talk to Senator Lyons
Okay.
tomorrow. Unless I catch her this afternoon.
Yeah, she's not in today physically.
Oh, okay, all these, I'll just drop her an email.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my game plan. I'm just waiting for the wrench to be dropped in it, but,
So we're for sure getting childcare and we're pretty clear on the price tag. Or the meter is still waiting.
there's all kinds of work going on in
Okay.
childcare, mostly because we can't start a program up whole cloth. We don't have the center structure. We don't have the staffing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like tomorrow we could just throw the doors open to adequate childcare. And so I know Senator Kitchell has been working with Senator Hardy and Senator Lyons to see if they can find an affordable way to do it. When they do that, whatever needs to be raised will come here. Just raising the state, it's a state appropriation that CFAP,
Right.
that would raise, so it's only if they need to raise extra money
Right.
that will come here. Maybe they won't, but given, I don't know. That's still a work in progress, but they're trying to find a way to start us, to move us forward. And but yeah, it's just doesn't materialize overnight. If they do something with 4-year-olds and put them into the school system, it'll come here. Yeah, because that'll hit the property tax.
And then it's still likely that universal school meals and paid family leave would be a post-crossover conversation.
Yes, because the yield will be on miscellaneous tax bill, and that's when
Right.
we look at the budget.
Right. And a fee bill might be coming our way.
The fee,
Post-crossover.
it might, but that's
It's
Yeah.
just fun to think about. I've been haven't seen it in a long time. Yeah, exactly.
so, yes, if
Not
there's
fun.
one, it'll be here. But those are all after crossover. So we've got, childcare is the one big one,
Mhm.
but there's probably some smaller bills with fees or something in it. You never know
Mhm.
what's gonna get sent here. There's a much smaller volume. I don't know if it's smaller volume or just, I can remember one year we had 80 bills on day one, from one senator, but, it just seems very slow getting things out, and I don't know. I've heard we're short one editor, and we've got a bunch of new legislators who didn't start putting bill requests in until later.
Right. And often all of our vices have a tax or something, but we're not
I
doing those
love
those
vices.
crossovers.
So yes, if sports betting is a vice,
I mean, that's what I call them.
but that has been on. I mean, miscellaneous tax someplace that can get
Right.
stuck.
Yeah.
If there's a revenue sharing or any
Mhm.
kind of a money raising.
There's a revenue sharing.
Yeah, so if that's on there, that can come here. get put on the Christmas tree.
Mhm.
It doesn't get out because, yeah, it's gonna, yeah, time is now very short.
Yeah.
Seems so early to be talking about a Christmas tree.
I love Christmas trees.
I like omnibus bills.
Especially in
Christmas tree.
Well, miscellaneous tax,
Yeah,
is
exactly.
basically, it covers everything but insurance.
Yeah.
So, it tends to be where we will put some smaller bills that will have a better chance as
Mhm.
part of a whole than if they get sent off on their own,
Yeah.
like candy tax. The chance that they get stuck on a wall,
Like when tampons became the everything bill.
never again. But we have some house bills, we could repay that. I could put something else on candy tax.
Oh, we have house bills now?
No, but
Oh,
we will
we will.
have,
Yeah.
yeah. All right,
I mean, everything might go back on the candy tax bill.
yeah, if they send it to us, I mean, that's what happened, we sent them over the bill. It got tacked on to miscellaneous tax, so they took it, but they still had the bill. They needed a vehicle to get the corporate income tax, and they probably were past the deadline to put in a committee for that. So they put it all on the tampon tax bill and sent it back.
Yeah.
And we dealt with it for 6 weeks on the agenda. And anyone that just read that agenda was wondering, what are they doing?
Yeah, very obsessed with.
We are. You know,
That committee, how could they spend
and
so
it
long?
wasn't hygiene by the time we finished. Okay, so that is it for today. And we, I'll see if I can find out what kind of bills are heading here. I'll check with Jen.
Well, and the property tax piece would be big, even if it's revenue neutral or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's coming and
Yeah.
separating that and telling the town, I mean, to me, the question is,
Judicial money.
just to say, if you just say non-homestead, homestead, that's on the grid list.
Yeah.
If you start to say occupy a
Mhm.
certain amount of time,
Exactly.
that's when we first took it up here,
Where do you do it?
that's when we had a problem.
Right.
How do you know it's occupied,
Brian,
and occupied by who?
Yeah,
he has some
that's
conflict.
hard.
So
Yeah,
we
I mean,
may-
you want police out checking to see if your window lights are on at night, and there's a car in your driveway.
Well, as I believe said, if you make it an incentive, then people do want to report, hey, look, I rent this out, you know, I want a tax break.
Well, well, first we gotta make it a tax break. I think we're gonna need to look at that. The recalibrating.
Yes, the change in overall.
Yeah,
rate.
so that your homestead tax is not in many towns
Right.
higher than your non-homestead. So,
Tax break just reclassified as agriculture,
okay, we're done.
like anything.
Oh,
Okay, Randy, hope to see you tomorrow.
Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. in
It
person.
was spitting a little snow here, but it hasn't done much of anything all day.
Well,
They were a little slimy this morning, just the short drive I had, but.
Yeah, it
I don't
wasn't
think I
great up
would
here
want to
at all.
drive
this
very
morning.
far.
But hopefully tomorrow will be fine.
Let's hope.